going to read down a summary of what we can release this morning to members of the media. Detectives with various local law enforcement agencies in Brunswick and New Hanover counties were conducting a joint investigation into a rash of armed robberies at commercial establishments, mostly involving area restaurants, which had occurred in September and October of 2013. After reviewing surveillance footage from the incidents, and after interviewing the employees who were victimized in those crimes, detectives began to notice a similar method of operation in as many as 10 of those robberies. 2 of the robberies occurred at local Pizza Hut establishments. Nearly all the robberies in question were committed by groups of 2 to 4 black males who wore masks, hoods, or bandanas to cover parts of their faces. The suspects brandished handguns during the robberies and used those guns to not only force employees to dump cash registers and safes, but also to force their victims into secluded areas of their businesses, including walk-in freezers. The suspects would not only take property belonging to the businesses, but they would also take personal items like cell phones, keys, and wallets from employees. The suspects often wore dark clothing. At least one of the suspects usually carried a bag into the establishments. All the robberies in question occurred near closing time at each of the businesses affected, with the exception of one of those robberies that occurred at the opening of business. Based on evidence collected and information obtained during that investigation, several businesses were placed under police surveillance. On the night of October 25th, 2013, multiple detectives with the Wilmington Police Department, the New Hanover County Sheriff's Office, and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives arrived at the Pizza Hut on 17th Street for the purpose of conducting surveillance at that location. In accordance with the rules of professional conduct that Mr. David has already discussed, and with charges currently pending against Jelani Smith, our office can only release the following information about the events that took place at the Pizza Hut on 17th Street on October 25th, 2013. Jelani Smith, age 20, was arrested shortly before midnight and charged with 5 counts of robbery with a dangerous weapon involving a handgun, 4 counts of first-degree kidnapping, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit robbery with a dangerous weapon. Smith's conspiracy charge alleges that he conspired with Tevin Rolando Robinson and Ronald Deshawn Rowland to commit the robbery at the Pizza Hut. Smith's robbery charge alleges that he, or others with whom he conspired, took U.S. currency, cell phones, and keys from the business and the victims involved. Smith is in the custody of the New Hanover County Detention Center under a $1.5 million bond. Robinson and Rowland were shot and killed by detectives who were attempting to effectuate their arrests following the robbery. Smith sustained a gunshot wound to his hand and was treated for his injury. Immediately after the shootings of Robinson and Rowland and Smith, and after the apprehension of Mr. Smith, the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation, at the request of Chief Ralph Evangelos and District Attorney Ben David, was asked to help process the scene and to investigate the circumstances surrounding the robbery and the officer-involved shootings. 6 detectives with the Wilmington Police Department were immediately placed on leave, pending the outcome of the investigation into the shootings. Their placement on leave was in line with department policy following any officer-involved shooting. As part of its investigation, the SBI has collected physical evidence, conducted multiple interviews, and reviewed surveillance footage from the incident. Our office has been in constant contact with agents from the SBI and has reviewed and discussed their findings with them. Our office has also reviewed the police reports, interviews, and surveillance footage provided by those members of the Wilmington Police Department who are not placed on leave and who were part of the Pizza Hut robbery investigation. Additionally, our office has met with detectives from the various agencies involved in the joint investigation into the string of armed robberies that were taking place between September and October of 2013. After a thorough review of all the above, the District Attorney's Office has concluded that officers with the Wilmington Police Department were entirely justified under our laws in using deadly force during the incident that took place at the Pizza Hut on the night of October 25th, 2013.
Thank you, Drew. I met with some of the family of one of the young men who is now deceased, and nothing is harder than talking to a mom whose child is dead. And I can tell you that Just as I'm sure you hunger for answers, I know that they do as well, and consistent with my past policy, I commit to meeting with them and the civil attorney of their choosing at an appropriate time to make available the full investigative details and make myself and the lead case agents from the SBI available to answer any of their questions, because I'm confident that what we are saying today is fully supported by the law. That transparency, again, is something that I would love to give more of the community a sense of today, but I can't. To be clear, if Mr. Robinson or Mr. Rowland were alive today, they would be equally charged with what Jelani Smith has already been charged with. I also want to mention that what is missing from that summary is the names of the 6 detectives. We are releasing them today. They are in your press packet. I want to thank you and the members of the press who have showed restraint in releasing their names. As you're going to hear, they're part of an elite force that does some difficult and dangerous work. And their anonymity helps not only in their investigations, but also in some cases protects their safety. I am releasing their information today, just as you're aware of the names of sexual assault victims, for instance, and you, in those cases, choose not to print those names. I ask you to consider whether you should show the same restraint here, and I urge you to do that. Whether you do or not is up to you. With that, now I will call on Chief Ralph Evangelist with the Wilmington Police Department, and then we'll answer any of your questions. Ralph.
Thank you, Ben. Good morning. 27 days ago, 6 Wilmington police officers responded to an armed robbery in progress here in Wilmington. Minutes later, they found themselves face to face with gunmen who had just robbed that local business. They made a decision to protect themselves and the citizens around them. The results were tragic, overwhelming, not only for the suspects and their families, but for these officers and the officers' families. These 6 officers represent more than 50 years of law enforcement experience combined. They represent the members of our detective division and of our mobile field force unit. And while their assignments vary, they are all committed to their jobs. October 25th is a grim reminder to all of us that the level of violence in our community has escalated among suspects. While suspects use more violent means to commit their crimes, officers at times use the level of force necessary to keep our community safe. I appreciate the hard work of the SBI and the sound counsel of District Attorney Ben David and his office. I applaud the men and women of the Wilmington Police Department who, despite the challenges of our current circumstances, come to work each and every day and serve to protect our citizens. And I say to them, keep up the good work. To the citizens of this community, I promise to use every available resource to provide transparency, truthfulness, quality investigations for not only the Wilmington Police Department, but for all of our citizens here in the city of Wilmington. Thank you.
Questions?
Is it safe to say the SBI investigation is now complete, or is it still ongoing?
No, it is complete from the standpoint of whether any criminal charges are warranted in this case. And with respect to getting all the documents put into one room, that has not happened yet. We've reviewed everything that they have. To be clear, all the officers fully cooperated, were interviewed, and we've had access to those, as well as, and I wish, again, that we could play this now, but we're going to have to wait for a court proceeding. Videos from inside the establishment, from the Sable helicopter and others. We are able to not just hear what happened, but in some cases see what happened, talk to the 4 witnesses inside the store as well. All those interviews have taken place and we reviewed them. We have that SBI file and we've been reviewing it. It is culled together in one place in Raleigh and eventually delivered to us. That's what I'll share with the civil attorneys of Robinson's or Rowland's families of choosing, and whether I'm confident we'll one day be presenting in a courtroom.
With Smith's shooting, you were very confident about your decision. With all of that's come since then with the NAACP, do you have the same confidence in this decision? Can you? Absolutely,
and let me be clear. I welcome anyone who wants to work in this community to call for peace and to hold us fully accountable. I appreciate anyone who wants to do that. What Reverend Barber and I talked about last week, and what we again talked about this week with members of the local chapter, is the need for the 3 T's that we talked about: trust, transparency, and the truth. We can only be effective on the street and in a courtroom if the community trusts us. We need to be transparent in our dealings. And what I said is, when we clear a case and there's nothing pending, we'll get up and answer any of your questions, which is what I did on November 1st. Whereas here, there is something pending. There's a different process in place to fully arrive at the transparency and truth that everyone wants, and that is in a courtroom, and that's what's going to happen here. And then finally, doggedly pursuing the truth means going wherever it leads, and that means outside investigators and an independent prosecutor. And I hope I've established that over the 9 years I've been district attorney. And what I've also tried to do, and what I did, and this was, they weren't aware of this when they made that press statement, Reverend Barber wasn't. He was not aware that I had released the 64-point memo or the 2.5-page legal summary. I gave that to him immediately afterwards, and I gave it to members of the NAACP. I've copied them with everything I've done today. They were not aware that I sent that to over 60 pastors in our community who helped call for peace. I've again done that today. I think it's important that we listen and not just talk, and so I'm committed to going out to this community and doing that. But I have to speak forcefully. I will speak in a courtroom and accuse someone of doing something and prove it beyond a reasonable doubt when a crime's committed, and I've done that before and I'll do it again. And when there is no crime and it's fully justified as here, I'll say it, and it was and it is. Next question.
Can you release the Sable video?
Again, that's part of the criminal investigation, and while that might have you can get into the public records, folks, with your station, but what I can say is because it's part of a pending investigation, we have to look at the rights of Jelani Smith, and the pretrial publicity that is tantamount in that case will probably preclude its dissemination. We'd probably need a Superior Court judge to pass on that at this point. My best advice, and certainly you can ask his attorney as well, is we will only release that because it's a part of a pending case with court approval.
Before you told us that they did have weapons and they were running at you guys, but they didn't fire, what type of weapons were they? Were they pointed at you? Were they on a belt? I mean, where were they and what kind of weapons were they?
We can't give any details on the specific types of weapons or where they were in relation to it. And believe me, that'll all come out, and I welcome the opportunity to put that in a courtroom. It could be the subject of different kinds of hearings. I mean, you're thinking, well, a trial's going to be months into the distance. We're going to, there's currently something set in December, which is administrative only as it relates to Mr. Smith. However, if we go before a grand jury, if it's before a Superior Court judge, if there's a bond hearing, if there is anything else, some of these details might come out. We welcome that. If there's any charging decisions moving forward, either to increase or decrease any charges and the basis for that, you'll be fully brought back into a courtroom and made aware of those details. We simply can't try this case in the press. We have to try it in the courtroom. I hope you understand that. Believe me, we were in the process of preparing a much more detailed summary when it occurred to us that, unlike the case that we just talked to you about, this one has something far different. Mr. Joyner has pending charges out of the Brandon Smith case, but that was related only to after-the-fact conduct, and we obtained his attorney's permission in putting the limited release of information that we did in that press release. Here is something far different, and that's why we're having to take this path.
You told us Jelani Smith was shot in the hand. Can you say anything about how many bullets were fired? Did all of those 6 officers fire bullets? That kind of thing.
We can't get into the number of bullets fired at this time. That will come out. I can say that he was shot in the hand and that his injuries were immediately treated. Officers called for assistance immediately, and he was transported, as the other 2 were, to the New Hampshire Regional Medical Center. As for the medical conditions of all 3 and how many shots were fired, that will all come out in the courtroom.
I have a question for Ralph. How worried are you about the safety of your officers, considering that the FBI warned that gangs are now targeting your officers?
That was an advisory. I'm always worried about our safety of our officers. Every night I go to lay my head down, I worry that something potentially could happen to one of our men or women. We will get out there and we'll take care of what we have to take care of, and we'll protect ourselves, but we'll protect the citizens of this community. I mean, it's not just us we're worried about, it's the law-abiding citizen who lives in fear because of some of these criminals who have taken over areas that we're taking back. And we've seen we've seen a low. We've seen a decrease in crime. We've seen a decrease in armed robberies. We've seen a decrease in drive-by shootings. We've seen a big decrease. That didn't happen by accident. That's part of a whole strategy we have in place. So, am I worried? I'm always worried. Every night I'm worried. You know, that I get that call at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning that I dread. So, I'm concerned. I'm always concerned.
How do you feel about Mr. David's findings here today?
Well, obviously, I'm happy about that. I mean, our officers did what they needed to do. It's unfortunate. Anytime there's a loss of life, it's tragic. Everyone has a family. Everyone has a mom, a dad, a brother, a sister. You know, and so it's tragic. But you know, it's what we do. Sometimes in police work, there's some bad things happen out there, and some violent things, and it's what we do. It's what we do is we keep the community safe.
Can you say whether or not, excuse me, the 3 people involved in this are suspected in any other armed robberies or any other open cases?
I cannot comment on that. I can say that there is an active investigation still pending.
You spoke of the 10 incidents earlier that all had the similar setup. I mean, are these 3 suspects that you might believe to have been involved in any of those other 10?
That's certainly something that's going to be the subject of future proceedings. You know, there's a rule of evidence called 404B, which means you can use conduct in one trial and another. Because of the ongoing nature of these investigations, really can't get into the facts of that, other than to say that that's, of course, something that morning and forward we have been looking at. In addition to the incidents on the 25th of October, we've been looking at multiple cases from September and October, as Drew mentioned in his release to you.
Can you say whether or not all 3 men were armed and whether or not they were listening to commands of officers?
Brianna, what I can tell you is that is the subject of the investigation and that will come out in court, but I can't say that here today.
You mentioned earlier that you had spoken with the family of one of the deceased. Talk to me a little bit about what they were saying.
That you know, they obviously wanted answers, and I told them that I understood that first as a father. You know, I'm not just a DA, I'm a DAD, and I understand that they hunger for those details. I know that you've already met Jelani Smith's family, and they were there at the first appearance. And I told this mother and sister that I welcome the opportunity to have them back in my office after this criminal proceeding was complete involving Mr. Smith, and I look forward to that. Just as I committed to doing that with Katie Parker, Brandon Smith's attorney. We met this week, and she said, you know, I wish that you were able to say November 1st everything you're showing me today, and I said, I do too. I can't. We have to respect the rights in that case of Mr. Joyner, and so some of the information I was sharing whether I couldn't share with you then, just as there's a lot of details now that you of course want to know, that we just can't say because we always have to balance the public's right to know with the defendant's right to a fair trial. So with that, I'm going to thank you all for coming.
Ben, I just have one question. I'm sorry. What charges against Jelani Smith are stemming from his behavior outside of the restaurant? Like, what charges did he face after he exited the restaurant?
It's not that. First of all, there's a view of something called acting in concert, which means that you're responsible for each other's actions throughout the entire course of the criminal enterprise. So, in effect, all 3 are doing everything that night. But because it's part and parcel of what happened that evening, the North Carolina bar, and I've listed in your press packet the number of the North Carolina bar, and I urge you to call them, Fran. We are not permitted to talk about the events immediately surrounding this incident, even if we're talking about 2 people who are deceased and aren't going to be tried, because it could implicate Mr. Smith's fair trial rights as well. And I urge you to call them. Mrs. McLaughlin at the bar. McLaughlin at the bar. I'll give you her direct extension.
In the wake of these officer-involved shootings, what would you say to certain parts of the community that maybe are starting to feel some distrust towards the law enforcement?
I would say that the very best thing to do is be a law-abiding citizen, because all these shootings involve people who are breaking the laws. The second choice I would say that was made by each and every one of these individuals is that they didn't submit immediately upon being told to do that. And the choices they made not only to commit crime but then not peacefully surrender is why we're here. I don't think people have something to fear from officers if they're law-abiding citizens, and I urge the entire community to help cooperate while these officers are doing their job, because that's how we're truly safe. Thank you all very much for being here.
Chief, did you say the officers are back to work?
They will be. They will be soon.
Do they have to interview?
No.
I'm sorry?
Go ahead, Drew.
Be really good. Okay, sure.
So